Okay, so welcome back to
Welcome
Unredacted
back.
Feathers. So glad you are back with us, and we promised you we're going to talk about this first appearance order and what happened to John Cook. So, if you will, just hang on to your seat here. We're going to see.
Here we go.
Here we go. Yeah. So the first appearance order, John Cook gets set with a $75,000 bond.
Wow.
The court finds that there is probable cause for the existence of the offense. It up, certainly lead to a higher bond and so forth. But so this bond of $75,000. And so,
you know what I need?
What?
I need you to tell me what happened.
Well, I think it's better told by...
I know, but just give me the condensed version.
Okay, and...
So, did this have anything to do with What the Hales?
I think it did have something to do with What the Hales.
What do you mean?
So this deal was that, and I've read it, I'll paraphrase, that someone had visited Otter Creek to go by Tubetown, and Tubetown has our friend What the
Hales?
No, well, What the Hales and What You Doing Willis.
Oh, I didn't even know about that.
So Travis started the channel, doing great. What You Doing Willis, and he's established Tubetown in Otter Creek, Florida. And if you haven't watched his channel, go check it out. He's got a bowling alley. He's got a putt-putt. He's got a mailbox where visitors can sign. And Travis is evidently the only resident and mayor of Tubetown, Florida, or Tubetown, USA, I think it is. And so we've actually got to do a little fishing with him and a couple other things. Yeah. So other things have happened, but... So apparently one of the visitors and fans of What the Hales, a long-term fan of What the Hales, had stopped by Tubetown and brought his daughter to check it out.
Oh, no.
And another friend. And they went to sign up. Well, evidently Mr. Cook was not happy about the fact that these people were visiting Tubetown, and met with an officer several times with his investigation, because the allegation was that he brandished at these folks in the car, and he should be investigated. Well, I'll tell you that the officer was very diligent, went back a number of times, and ultimately obtained a warrant to search John Cook's home. I think
Did they find the weapon?
They did find the weapon. The weapon the weapon that John said he didn't have anymore.
Oh no!
So I think it's probably worth looking at in detail. Well, then so in fact, I'm going to go ahead and ask Elsie to put up a highlighted portion that kind of hits the high points. So after this discussion with the What the Hales fan that came to Tubetown, the fellow's pulling away with his child and evidently a friend that's with him in the car, and they tell the law enforcement that John Cook from his right pocket and pointed the gun right at them, which made him fear for his life. They described the firearm as a smaller revolver. This ends up significant because John later admits that he has that he even possesses a revolver. So
he lies.
Well, it appears that he didn't tell the truth and changes his story. And, that's kind of what happens. If you're not telling the truth, it's hard to tell this. It's a good reason not to lie. I mean, there are a lot of good reasons not to lie. I don't think we should ever lie. But if you're going to lie...
In this case, he should have just
only do it once. Because when you start trying to recall the lie over and over, it's hard to keep your own story straight.
Well, as his attorney, you would have just told him to be quiet, right?
Well, as I've told anyone, in the event that you read your Miranda rights, you should observe those rights. You have the right to remain silent. That can't be used against you in a court of law if you observe them. But it can be used against you if you start talking. And While there is frequently nowadays recording equipment to confirm what was said, things can be interpreted in different ways. It's just a good idea if you read Miranda rights to serve those rights. And frankly, had John done that, he probably wouldn't be sitting in jail right now. Except that what we're going to see here is that somebody apparently rats John out, saying that he did have a revolver. And let me get into that. So the officer goes to John's residence, activated his air horn in an attempt to get someone to come out to the gate. A short time later, John walked out from the trailers on the property and approached the fence. He advised the defendant that I was there because someone called and said there was an incident that occurred. John, without asking, started telling me that there was a white car out there and it drove down the street. So John's already saying to the officer, I know what you're here about. He advised he looked to see how much he had to cover his stereo equipment, which doesn't make much sense to me. Car went by and the person inside said something like, quote, get a light. The person driving pointed something out the window, which he thought might be. Now, John didn't call the. And that comes back into play a little later. John said he hid behind a chicken coop. So the officer conscientiously notices a sign that says cameras recording on this property. So he asked for a copy of those recordings, which he thought would have captured this interaction. And the response he was given by John is that he saw the cameras that pointed towards the gate and towards the roadway. John advised that, quote, he took the cameras down to change them. To charge them. So the cameras weren't working at the time that this incident occurred, according to John.
So let me make sure I'm following you. You have a fan, a What the Hell's fan, that is going to visit Toontown.
Yeah, Toontown. Which is located across from John's residence.
In Otter Creek.
Yes.
Okay. And John decides that he is going to interact with these people.
No question about that.
Okay.
But not in a favorable way.
And then decides to pull a...
Evidently.
Okay.
So, if you followed this story, you know that this gentleman, unfortunately, has some...
anger issues.
Pretty significant issues. So, 4th of July at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, goes back and talks with John again. I want to ask you some clarifying questions about yesterday, he read him his Miranda rights before he questioned him. So he read the Miranda rights, and John advised he understood his rights. When asked, he stated, get it over with. And I clarified where he was yesterday. He advised he was over by his stereo systems, observed this vehicle in question drove by, and he thought it was a Hales fan.
Which in fact it was.
Okay.
And Tubetown did not have any cameras?
Tubetown evidently did not have any cameras that were pointed in this area. At least that hasn't come out yet.
Okay.
Who knows? We'll find out before it's over, I'm sure. So he says he ducked behind the shed area and the car drove by and the driver had something sticking out the window. He couldn't tell, John says he couldn't tell if it was a gun or a phone, so he stashed himself behind the old chicken coop. I then asked the defendant, he advised that he did. I asked the defendant what type of, he advised a knife. I asked him what kind, and he advised it was a CZ and it was black. That's the defendant if he owned a revolver, and he advised that he got rid of a revolver a few months ago. And I asked, how did he get rid of it? And he advised he sold it. And I asked if he knew who he sold it to, and he advised he didn't know who he sold it to. I then asked if he pointed at the car, and he said he did not. I then tried to get an accurate location of where the defendant said the vehicle stopped on the roadway, and he described the location using landmarks between a telephone pole and a shed on his property. So a week later, on July 11th, at approximately 8 o'clock in the morning, first thing in the morning, 8:05, a search warrant was executed at the defendant's address in Otter Creek. After reading the search warrant, the defendant was again read Miranda, told he had the right to remain silent, and was asked if he pulled out a firearm at the vehicle or the driver of the vehicle on the date of the incident, July 3rd. The defendant again denied pointing at the vehicle or the person in the vehicle. The defendant was again asked about him only owning a 9mm and his cohabitant, which must be Lynette Preston. His cohabitant also owns a 9mm. During the course of the investigation, detectives were interviewing witnesses on the scene. One witness said the defendant lied to law enforcement. Witnesses said on the date in question, Cook admitted to her that he did brandish the firearm because he was fearful of what the victim had in his hand. Now, you may have seen this TV 20 report that was published by Television 20, which is a news station over in Gainesville, and also by Jeremy on What the Hales.
People are coming to Otter Creek from out of state because of a social media influencer. And one person says they were threatened, and another man will now face a judge tomorrow because of it. TV 20's Kayla Lewis breaks down the two sides of the story.
Right behind me is a place called Tubetown here in Otter Creek based on a YouTube channel. Wes Dockery was visiting with his family from Illinois to come and sign this guest book. But he says when he was leaving, the neighbor across the street pulled out a gun.
For my 8-year-old to see that, and then she just was crying.
60-year-old John Cook is in the Levy County Jail and charged with aggravated assault after he was accused of threatening Dockery and his family last week. Dockery says Cook yelled at them, so he rolled down his window.
And I was like, what'd you say? And he goes, do whatever you want. I was like, what? And he goes, do whatever you want. Yelled it again. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he goes, you're going to lose anyway.
But there's two sides of the story. Cook's ex-wife, Michelle Preston, wasn't home when the incident took place, but doesn't believe Cook would do that.
He said that a man had drove by slow filming and that the man had shouted something to him, and he had been behind the magnolia tree.
Dockery says after Cook yelled at him, that's when Cook pointed his gun at their car.
And I'm thinking, if I pull off, is he going to start shooting or what? So I want to try to talk him down.
Preston says Cook was at home, and if he did pull out his gun, he had every right to do so.
Instantly threw it in reverse, and when he did, his hand came out the window with something held out the window. John doesn't see very well. He couldn't tell the difference between a gun or a phone.
Levy County Sheriff's deputies say lack of evidence and conflicting statements hampered the investigation before a warrant was served. After that, evidence of the supposed assault was recovered as well as the gun. In Otter Creek, Kayla Lewis, TV 20 News.
Witness advised that they hid the firearm that was used in this and consented to law enforcement recovering the firearm. So apparently this witness, I'm thinking it was Miss Preston, the cohabitant of John, advised they hid the firearm and consented to law enforcement getting it. So
she was like a co-defendant as well?
No, I don't think she was a co-defendant. I think maybe she was concerned about being a co-defendant.
Or getting rid of evidence?
Well, that's interesting. That could be a tampering with evidence
yes.
charge. It could be because they hid the firearm. Interesting. We'll see if anything comes out of that. When confronted with the witness statement, when they told John what they were told by apparently his cohabitant, defendant claims he just bought one 2 days ago from a friend. But then when law enforcement asked the friend's name, the defendant hesitated and then advised it was just some guy. And he didn't know his name, and it was just some guy. The defendant was asked again if he pointed at the person or the vehicle, and again denied pointing it at anyone.
So he went to an unknown person, and he bought an unknown person.
That's what he said. Apparently. Which obviously raises suspicions.
You think?
Which might be a reason to keep your mouth shut.
That's correct.
Nonetheless, after several more minutes, the defendant was informed of information obtained. The defendant did pull out a revolver like the victim had stated on July 3rd, 2024. that the revolver was recovered. So at this point, it appears that law enforcement already had this revolver in their possession. Maybe they showed it to him, I'm not sure. But then John states, he carried, quote, well, this is a quote from the report, he carries a revolver on him at all times, end quote. Defendant then continued to deny that he pulled third. Last sentence of the next to the last paragraph, quote, the defendant finally admitted to law enforcement that on July 3rd, he did pull his revolver out of his pocket, but he didn't point it at anyone.
So,
end quote.
So he had.
Well, depends which story you believe. The last one was he had to, not only did he have the gun,
and he pointed it to,
but he pulled it out of his pocket, but he didn't point it at anyone. So the story has evolved, right? And subsequent to that admission, he was taken into custody and then first appeared.
And do you think, does it say there that law enforcement spoke to the alleged victim?
Yes.
Did they?
No.
So that means that what they pulled out from the window was not
Well, who even knows if any of that's true, because
his story has been inconsistent right from the beginning.
Well, if it was a phone, you would have thought it would be videoing.
That's correct.
And
this
apparently
is YouTube.
There wasn't a video preserved by the victim in the case, unfortunately.
Okay. So now he gets arrested. We've gone through the charges, what he's facing, what his bonds was when he got first appeared.
Yes.
And now we're at the part where he is trying to qualify for an attorney. Now, before we get into that, I have one more question.
Okay.
So, if his bond was $75,000, does that mean he had to post $75,000 to get out of jail? Or is he still in jail?
It's a great question. So, from what we know, he's still in jail.
So, he hasn't been able to post $75,000?
Well, the reality is that a person in the state of Florida has a right to post a cash bond. So if, and this is my opinion, and it's a very strong opinion, that there is a real prejudice against people who don't have money, okay, in our bond system. Because let's use an extreme example. Somebody's accused of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and their bond set at $500,000. $500,000.
Okay, so what you're trying to say is, for example, with these charges, somebody can be given a bond of $1 million, or it can be given a bond of $1,000 for the same charges.
It's true.
And the person's, depending on what kind of financial circumstances they have, is whether they can post it or not, and it's the same charge.
So,
okay.
Yeah. So to me, just because somebody has the money or the resources to post the bond doesn't make them any less dangerous than the person who doesn't have the money or have the bond. So this is, in my opinion, it's kind of a pet peeve that, anyway, I don't know if we want to include that or not, because it is...
So $75,000 was his bond.
$75,000 is what his bond was set at. So the reality is that in Florida, you can post a cash bond if you have the resources to do it, and if once the case is resolved, you get all of your money back.
Attend all of the hearings.
You show up for all of the hearings. The case gets resolved. It's either dismissed, or it's or you're convicted, or you're acquitted, or a plea agreement's entered, and
the case is over.
The case is over. You get all of your money back. Okay,
regardless of whether you get convicted or not.
It's really an appearance bond. It's just to confirm that you will show up for court as ordered by the court. Okay,
perfect.
So an appearance bond is a big deal. You have to show up for court, and as long as you show up until the case is finalized, if you post a cash bond, that is the entire amount, you get the entire amount back, which can be pretty significant, right? And if you have the means then to post a cash bond, you get all your money back. Well, if that happened, the bond system for the state of Florida would fail, right?
That's true.
And there are a lot of people that make their living in the state of Florida under the cash bond system. Now, this has been handled differently in lots of different states. But Florida continues with this system. The reality is that you post a 10%, if you reach an agreement with a bondsman, that you post 10% of the value. So in John's case, it would be $7,500 is typically what a bondsman would require in order for them to post a bond for John's release. Now the bondsmen have to have their own insurance companies, and in the event the person doesn't show up, it's their obligation to go get them and produce them for the court. It's a pretty, maybe you're familiar with Dog the Bounty Hunter, or
Oh yes, I used to watch that.
and other shows where, I mean, it's quite a dangerous situation, particularly these days, to go get somebody that doesn't want to go to court and bring them back before the court, but it happens. That's their job, or the bondsman can lose that $7,500. So what I've seen that's become more and more commonplace is not only does the bondman get the 10% surety, but they also get some collateral, such as a mortgage on a piece of property, a mortgage on a home. So if the person doesn't show up, they don't only get they lose the $7,500, but they may get the property that the person has posted up.
Collateral. Mm-hmm.
Collateral. A poor person, unable to post bond, it might be a $2,500 bond, might be a $5,000 bond, might be a single mom who doesn't have access to her children, who's kept in jail unless she takes a deal. Held in jail and unable to post a bond unless they take a deal, like probation. And if they take a deal, whether they did the crime or they didn't do the crime, they want to get out. Everybody wants to get out of jail that's in jail, or at least almost everybody. And so I think, unfortunately, what can happen in our system is that people can plead and admit to things that they didn't do just to get out of jail, which to me is horrible, heartbreaking, a horrible piece. And so I do think this is an area that has to be addressed.